The Partition of India is the division of India into two independent countries, India and Pakistan. Today in this video you are going to find out what led to the partitioning of these states and what were the consequences. By the end of the 19th century, several nationalist movements had emerged in India. Indian nationalism had expanded as the result of British policies of education and the advances made by the British in India in the fields of transportation and communication. However, British insensitivity to and distance from the people of India and their customs created such disillusionment among Indians that the end of British rule became necessary and inevitable. While the Indian National Congress was calling for Britain to quit India, in 1943 the Muslim League passed a resolution demanding the British divide and quit. There were several reasons for the birth of a separate Muslim homeland in the subcontinent, and all three parties, the British, the Congress, and the Muslim League, were responsible. As colonizers, the British had followed a divide and rule policy in India. In the census they categorized people according to religion and viewed and treated them as separate from each other. The British based their knowledge of the people of India on religious texts and the intrinsic differences they found in them, instead of examining how people of different religions coexisted. They also were fearful of the potential threat from the Muslims, who were the former rulers of the subcontinent, ruling India for over 300 years under the Mughal Empire. To win them over to their side, the British helped establish the Mohammedan Anglo-Oriental College at Aligarh and supported the All India Muslim Conference, both of which were institutions from which leaders of the Muslim League and the ideology of Pakistan emerged. As soon as the League was formed, Muslims were placed on a separate electorate. Thus, the separateness of Muslims in India was built into the Indian electoral process. There was also an ideological divide between the Muslims and the Hindus of India. While there were strong feelings of nationalism in India, by the late 19th century there were also communal conflicts and movements in the country that were based on religious identities rather than class or regional ones. Some people felt that the very nature of Islam called for a communal Muslim society. Added to this were the memories of power over the Indian subcontinent that the Muslims held, especially in old centers of Mughal rule. These memories might have made it exceptionally difficult for Muslims to accept the imposition of colonial power and culture. Many refused to learn English and to associate with the British. This was a severe drawback as Muslims found that cooperative Hindus found better government positions and thus felt that the British favored Hindus. Consequently, social reformer and educator Sir Syed Ahmed Khan, who founded Mohammedan Anglo-Oriental College, taught the Muslims that education and cooperation with the British was vital for their survival in the society. However, tied to all the movements of the Muslim revival was the opposition to assimilation and submergence in Hindu society. Hindu revivalists also deepened the chasm between the two nations. They resented the Muslims for their former rule over India. Hindu revivalists rallied for a ban on the slaughter of cows, a cheap source of meat for the Muslims. They also wanted to change the official script from the Persian to the Hindu Devanagari script, effectively making Hindi rather than Urdu the main candidate for the national language. The Congress made several mistakes in their policies which further convinced the League that it was impossible to live in an undivided India after freedom from colonial rule because their interests would be completely suppressed. One such policy was the institution of Band Matram, a national anthem historically linked to anti-Muslim sentiment, in the schools of India where Muslim children were forced to sing it. The Congress banned support for the British during the Second World War while the Muslim League pledged its full support, which found favor from the British, who needed the help of the largely Muslim army. The civil disobedience movement and the consequent withdrawal of the Congress Party from politics also helped the League gain power, as they formed strong ministries in the provinces that had large Muslim populations. At the same time, the League actively campaigned to gain more support from the Muslims in India, especially under the guidance of dynamic leaders like Jinnah. There had been some hope of an undivided India, but the Congress's rejection of the interim government set up under the Cabinet Mission Plan in 1942 convinced the leaders of the Muslim League that compromise was impossible and partition was the only course to take. The partition of India and Pakistan was one of the most disastrous events in the 20th century. Estimates of the death toll post-partition range from 200,000 to 2 million. Many were killed by members of other communities and sometimes their own families. The partition affected people on both sides, especially in the region of Punjab. While deciding the border between the two countries, Punjab and Bengal were the states to be divided primarily on the basis of religious dominance. Women were raped brutally, often paraded naked in the streets and then murdered. Their husbands were shot dead in front of them. Apart from riots, cholera also killed thousands of people due to lack of proper medical facilities. Trains which were supposed to carry 40, 50 people in one bogie, carried more than 100. This decision led to riots in few districts of Punjab, which later spread to almost whole northern region. Many Hindus and Sikhs lived in the west, and many Muslims lived in the east, and the fears of all such minorities were so great that the partition saw many people displaced and much intercommunal violence. Another consequence was the mass mobilization. An approximate of 14.5 million people were displaced. People had to leave their homes where their families lived for generations. In 1947, Pakistan was created out of India when both the countries got independence from British rule and also during the partition of India. Series of conflicts were taken place between India and Pakistan. Reasons of conflicts are border dispute, Kashmir problem, water dispute, and terror controversy, and still the rivalry exists between two nations.